Good evening. Another year of the current era is coming to a close, and so welcome to a year's end edition of our program The Other Day about the events, people and phenomena of 2003. That which going forward you'd never imagine us without, much less understand. In 2003, we saw the idiot TV series, the Tuzla conflict, the euro surpassed the dollar in value, crooked cops, Abramovich by Chelsea St. Petersburg turned 300, the war in Iraq, the YUKOS case, new government in Georgia and Azerbaijan, Chechen suicide bombings, Terminator as governor, the right lose the Duma election, flash mobs become a new pastime. Atypical pneumonia was the illness of the year. The newly discovered ailment was similar to pneumonia, the flu, and measles all at once, and had a 10% mortality rate. Atypical pneumonia was an airborne disease. There were no tested remedies, and protective masks such as this one were worn by tens of millions in affected areas of the most densely populated part of the world, the Asia-Pacific region. China's southern provinces were in the very epicenter. The first case was identified back in November of 2002, but Chinese authorities tried to sweep the outbreak under the rug. Atypical pneumonia found its way into 27 countries. Russia even shut down its border with China. There was only one confirmed case in the country, and the patient recovered. 648 people died in China. Closer to the wintertime, medical experts were warning that there was a high chance of atypical pneumonia coming back. First, there were soap operas. Those were followed by crime dramas, and in 2003, for the first time ever, they aired a TV series based on classic Russian literature, based on a 19th century novel by Dostoevsky titled The Idiot. This risky 10-episode experimental series was produced by Valery Todorovsky and directed by Vladimir Bortko. They can't even imagine us not being savages. Up until this day, and the more the further we go. Oh, good lord. Yevgeny Mironov played Prince Mishkin. The rest of the cast was comprised of the leading actors of the time, like Mashkov, Batalashvili, Churikova, Nayolova, Boyarsky, and Petrenko. At least 25% of the entire primetime TV audience was tuning in to watch them. I'll take her right now. Right now, I'm a taker. Back off, you jackass. Back off. Back off. Critics weren't impressed with Nastasia Filipovna and with the Mysteries of St. Petersburg-like set, but they deemed it a success and speculated on which novel from the school curriculum will become a smash hit next season. I'd better not come in tomorrow. Call in sick. Delightful suffering. That's what the past year has been all about. Delightful suffering. 2003 was a year of horrendous fires with multiple casualties in children's and educational facilities. In April, several regular and boarding schools were burning. In November, the Friendship of People's University dormitory caught fire. All instances involved old buildings and electrical malfunctions. The wooden school in the town of Sidibil in Yakutia was built back in 1927. The raging fire blocked the exits, and 22 pupils were killed. It all happened way too fast. The fire spread too fast. In Dagestan, a boarding school for deaf in the university dorm was by far the worst. 30 lives. The only fire that didn't kill anyone was in an orphanage in Buryatia. In a Moscow orphanage, one kid was killed in a mere 100-square-foot fire. With 41 victims, mostly students from Africa. 1 year and 21 days is how long the shortest-lived Russian federal TV channel existed. Known as TVS, it was pulled off the air on June 22, 2003. It was supposed to be a channel owned neither by the government nor a media tycoon, and it was uniquely configured, being a non-profit collaboration between Media Socium, a group of journalists who protested against new management at NTV and who saw TV6 get shut down, and 12 key shareholders. From the very beginning, the 12 stakeholders with their constant disagreements made it impossible for anybody to sit on the fence. They replaced 3 CEOs in a year, ad revenue was several times lower than expected, their flagship projects, a series called Money and the reality show Behind Glass You're in the Army Now, were flops. Regional partners opted to work with other channels, and at some point operators in Moscow began shutting them down when they failed to pay for distribution of their signal. TVS was terminated by the Ministry of Press, who gave their frequency over to the state-owned Sport channel. We are aware of the result, or where that leaves us, as it were. We had free and totally uncensored television, but now it is no more. In 2003, the Russian people learned of the existence of Tuzla, considered a sandbar by Russia, while the Ukraine deemed it an island. Before 1925, the narrow and long Tuzla sandbar continued the Taman Peninsula, but then it was eroded by a horrendous storm, leaving just a 1 square mile island. For convenience's sake, the island was made a part of the Crimea. The Crimea fell under Ukrainian jurisdiction, and the Ukraine later became a sovereign nation. In September of 2003, they began to pour sand for a dam from Taman towards Tuzla, at a rate of 160 yards a day, with crews working 3 shifts. There was just over 100 yards left to the Ukrainian border, though only according to the Ukraine, since officially nobody had ever outlined a clear border neither in the Azov Sea nor the Kerch Strait. Though the sandbar had turned into an island long ago, the tale was still alive.
The water was washing the sand away.
Everybody in Russia knew that this was an act of vengeance, aimed at restoring political and geographical justice. However, no answer was given to Ukraine or even to the Russian people as to where the dam was supposed to terminate. The Ukraine was hastily securing its border. President Kuchma, who was in South Africa, flew back home and went straight to Tuzla. Once the dam got to a border patrol pontoon, that's where negotiations began. One side seeing it as an island, the other as a peninsula. Divide the bed, not the water. A marriage actually made in the heavens, with Russian hero Colonel Yuri Malenchenko marrying an American woman while in orbit. He attended the ceremony that was held in Texas via telebridge.
I'm very happy to be here on the board International Space Station. Very proud.
Ekaterina Dmitrieva, who'd lived in the States since childhood, sold the right to broadcast the first ever cosmic wedding to the TV network that paid for the transmission. Texas state law allowed you to register a marriage even in the absence of one side. The bosses at Russia's space agency were strictly against it. An officer had to report changing his marital status to his superiors. They promised that from now on, weddings on board spacecraft would be banned by contract. There will now be 2 famous Yuris. Gagarin, the first man to fly to space, and Malenchenko, the first to marry in space.
Today, the first fruit fly perished.
A Russian film called The Return triumphed at the International Film Festival in Venice in 2003. This was the first time the winner of the prize for Best Debut also won the festival's main prize, the Golden Lion. A 10-minute round of applause for director Andrei Zvyagintsev from Novosibirsk, actors Konstantin Lavronenko, Ivan Dobronravov, and Vladimir Gerin, who died shortly after filming ended. 35 countries purchased the rights to show the film produced by a private company called Ren TV. The Return was a parable posing as a benign story about how a father took his sons fishing. I said, lift the oars! And here we go, row! And row! And I'm like, what do you think, Alex? His response was, last time I was so bored was when I saw Stalker by Tarkovsky. There were lots of talks that year about reforming the army with how many accidents were happening in the military. Particularly bad ones were when 2 helicopters collided, another nuclear submarine sank, and a strategic bomber fell from the sky. Our military leadership was deliberately open with the media. 2 Mi-24 helicopters collided when descending during a training exercise in Primoria. The defense minister claimed it was bravado that caused the crash, the pilots attempting to land both machines simultaneously. There's something going down. The Sunken K-159 submarine reminded people of the Kursk disaster from 3 years prior. It was being towed with total disregard for safety protocol, and 9 of the 10 people on board were killed. You're meant to tow a vessel at 3 knots per hour. And in a critical situation, they violated these regulations. It was said that the Tu-160 bomber fell solely due to technical reasons, which nonetheless supposedly didn't cast any doubt onto the quality of the plane itself. These planes will still be flying around 50 to 60 years from now. It's a truly unique bird, as long as it's modernized every 10 years or so. For the entire autumn of 2003, the Russian media was fixated on a scandal caused by production choreographic disagreements, a dispute between an employer and employee, between Russia's state-owned Bolshoi theater and ballerina Anastasia Volotchkova. The Bolshoi's management offered the ballerina a 4-month instead of a 1-year contract, but when she refused to sign it, she was laid off. The idea was that the ballerina's sole partner had left the theater and they couldn't guarantee her employment. Also, she had allegedly put on weight and was out of shape. If the entire world is discussing the height, weight, and size of Anastasia Volotchkova, I don't think that'll benefit my image. Volotchkova fired back big time, holding press conferences, participating in debates, and even filing a case in court which resulted in her being reinstated, though the theater and the Ministry of Culture still maintained that this wouldn't end well for her. The problem is that Anastasia is out of shape, and it is a serious issue, since classic ballet involves dancing with a partner who will have to frequently support her and so on. Volotchkova had long separated her dancing and her pop star media image, and for her it was important to confirm her status as a Bolshoi theater ballerina. I am sure that they already want to fire me. They're looking for an excuse, no doubt. The euro was worth more than the US dollar for the entirety of 2003. First, the euro exchange rates caught up with that of the dollar. Then it became worth $1.10, 20 cents, until it finally peaked at $1.25. There were more dollars in the world, but Russia was closer to Europe, and so more people began to keep their savings in euro and use it as a benchmark for hard currency, with the famous Russian conditional unit now more frequently referring to euro. I'd like to exchange this for euro. Passport, please. 40% of all contracts between Russian and foreign companies were now in euro. And even the government was keeping a quarter of its foreign exchange reserves in euro. Travel agencies, car dealerships, trendy clothing stores were all now dealing in euro. And the most prosperous Russian folks who were receiving dollar salaries lost 10% of their earnings in a year's time. In the summer of 2003, the word werewolf was added to Russian political jargon, which was a person who could turn into a beast according to ancient belief systems. The Internal Affairs Ministry launched an operation to expose crooked cops or werewolves in uniform. And on June 23rd, 6 high-ranking Moscow criminal investigation officers, together with an Emergency Situations Ministry General, were detained. There were talks of an organized crime group consisting of 130 people. This operation was basically the Russian equivalent of the Italian Mani Pulite. The first arrests were carried out pretty much on live TV. The charges were for blackmail and extortion by means of fabricating criminal cases. They found loads of gold, millions of dollars in cash, and luxurious mansions. Amazing how law enforcement bosses never knew where their own subordinates lived. They'd plant drugs or weapons, press criminal charges. The role of Russia's Commissioner Katani was played by head of the MVD Boris Gryzlov, who urged citizens to videotape corrupt traffic cops and send him the recordings. Take pictures of these werewolves in police uniforms. Videotape them and send the recordings to internal security headquarters. We know what to do with such material. Even more people began suspecting the operation to be a publicity stunt by United Russia, where Gryzlov was the chairman. After getting off to such a hectic start, the campaign suddenly died down. Starting in July of 2003, Russia had its own team in the UK Premier League, after Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea. Russia's most mysterious billionaire, the owner of Sibneft and governor of Chukotka, Roman Abramovich acquired almost $100 million worth of their stock, then paid off their $150 million debt, and then spent $180 million on 11 new players. Chelsea became one of the best teams in its league. Abramovich himself became a superstar, with the UK media referring to him as Mr. Chelsea. Residents of London even voted for him as Man of the Year for 2003. From then on, every game at Chelsea's stadium would start with Kalinka, while after the match, fans would sing personal praise to Chelsea's new owner. Abramovich's extravagant purchase shocked everyone back home as well, though not too many people were pleased. Calls to investigate the deal and where the funds came from were never followed up by legal action, but they did solidify the talking point that making money off of minerals from one country and then relocating the funds to another one is just wrong. We haven't been living in a free country for that long, so we are not quite used to the notion of people spending their own money as they see fit. It used to be that mass power outages were a problem inherent only to Russia. But in 2003, leading Western nations were hit by blackouts. And on August 14th, the US encountered the worst emergency in the history of its energy sector. There's no indication of this being a terrorist act. There was an outage on the east coast of the US and Canada that sent 50 million people back to the Stone Age, including the entire city of New York. Elevators and trains were out, as well as stoplights, air conditioners, refrigerators, and cell phones. Depending on where, the lights came back on anywhere between 6 to 24 hours later. Soon after, the south of England suffered a blackout, then Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and almost all of Italy. Instances of panic or looting were very rare. Governments were scrambling to reform their respective countries' outdated energy infrastructure. Toronto's mayor predicted a surge in the birth rate in 9 months' time, in May of 2004. In 2003, the cradle of 3 revolutions and 1 president, the city of St. Petersburg, turned 300. Celebrations were even more massive than during the biggest holiday of the previous era, which was Moscow's 850th anniversary. The St. Petersburg anniversary proved to be the most important holiday of Putin's Russia, though some folks in St. P ironically referred to it as the Zoo Year anniversary, and to the city itself as Putinburg. Even when the Russian Empire was inviting all flags to be our guests, St. Petersburg didn't see nearly this many of them. It hosted a CIF, a Euro Union, and a G8 summit, with 41 national leaders present all at once. Just like millions of its residents, I today confess my love for St. Petersburg. The anniversary appeared to be more about honoring the old empire capital with its cathedrals and palaces. The freshly restored Konstantinovsky was now serving as the president's St. Petersburg residence. I would like to make a toast to European solidarity, to the prosperity of the people of our nations, and to your good health, ladies and gentlemen. The issues that had developed since the capital was relocated remained unresolved. Communal apartments, the unfinished ring road and dam, uneroded subway line. St. P was an all-around alternative to Moscow. You can see people sunbathing over there. Yeah, a couple of ladies. That is so in the spirit of our city. It was a turbulent time for Russian soccer. The national team and clubs were winning and failing, coaches were retiring, and in a surprise happy ending, Russia earned the right to participate in the European Championship. The biggest disappointment was Spartak Moscow. The 9-time Russian champion team was in worse form than ever, and after a debacle, the club's CEO Andrei Chervichenko fired the head coach Oleg Romantsev. Meanwhile, Spartak fans were suggesting Chervichenko go back home. Valery Gazayev started the year as head coach for CSK and the national team, but in both cases he failed. Right before the playoffs for the European Championship, the national team was assigned a new coach, Georgy Yartsev, the man who saved the day. The culmination, 2 matches against Wales, Vadim Yevseyev scoring the winning goal and screaming his soul out after. In 2003, the federal government made a decisive attempt to formalize Chechnya's new existence as a part of Russia. There was a referendum on adopting a new constitution and a Republican presidential election. The new constitution was approved with massive enthusiasm, by 90% of voters at 95% voter turnout. As for the presidential vote, anybody who could have given the appointed head of administration Akhmat Kadyrov a run for his money was removed. There will be people alluding to fraud, to Kadyrov being pro-Kremlin. I'd be proud to call myself pro-Kremlin. But despite this legitimization, Chechen suicide bombers, who were more often females, continued to commit one horrible atrocity after another. 2003 was the year of Shahid women, with 10 terrorist attacks occurring from May through December. The 2 most devastating involved the destruction of buildings belonging to the Nadterichny district administration and a military hospital in Mozdok. They're like zombies. These people are desperate. I know the Chechen mentality. This never used to happen. 3 suicide bombings occurred in Moscow. 2 women set off explosives at a rock festival in Tushino. On Tverskaya Street, another terrorist's bomb malfunctioned, though an FSB technician was killed when attempting to disarm it. And finally, another woman blew up the entrance to the National Hotel right across from the Kremlin. The summer of 2003 was the hottest Europe had seen in 500 years at least. Certainly throughout the entire time, people had the capacity to measure the outside temperature. Immense forest fires were raging in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and France. For the first half of August, the temperature in France was a stable 40 degrees Celsius. Over 11,000 people died from the heat or related ailments. An absolute record was set in Spain, where the temperature got up to 57 Celsius. The heat wave of 2003 was an even bigger disaster than the floods of 2002. Reactors had no cooling because of rivers drying out, which resulted in nuclear power plants being shut down in Germany. Hydroelectric stations were producing less power. River navigation was pretty much paralyzed. Crops and especially sunflowers were perishing. Europe blamed the United States for the drought, with them declining to ratify the Kyoto Protocol on greenhouse gases that were the cause of global warming. We need beer, light beer. The British can't live without it. But there was a silver lining. Ice cream and beer sales were through the roof, while the scorching sun rays made for one of the best wine grape harvests of the last century. If Paul McCartney sings on the Red Square, then it says Lennon on the mausoleum. It all happened on May 24th, 2003. And to make the picture look more momentous, they removed some of the scaffolding from St. Basil's Cathedral that was undergoing restoration. 50,000 spectators witnessed him perform 36 songs, with back in the USSR getting an encore. Right before visiting the former USSR, Paul McCartney gave an exclusive interview to The Other Day.
Do you know that your name Paul in Russian?
Do you know that your name means half in Russian?
Paul McCartney.
We have this popular joke about you having to visit Russia at least twice.
Means half, and it's
Oh, does it really mean half? That's interesting. I'm actually a Gemini, so I sort of consist of two halves. I guess that means I'll have to come back and play again.
play again.
Looks like this concert will be the first one half.
One half.
McCartney.
Paul.
Paul in Moscow. This was akin to a state visit. The Duma tried to cancel the concert, but 150 votes in support of the move weren't enough. McCartney met with the national leader. The Beatle was certified as an honorary professor of the St. Petersburg Conservatory, but most importantly, justice was restored 40 years later. The most important event in the Russian public domain that year had to be the YUKOS case. The current political system, the power structure, the business community, the courts and prosecutors, property rights, the investment climate. The YUKOS case reflected what condition all of that and many other things were in back in 2003 in Russia. Before the investigation was launched on July 2nd, YUKOS was a shining example of a transparent company, while its head Mikhail Khodorkovsky was officially the richest man in Russia. If their goal is to send me into exile or to prison, might as well put me in jail because I refuse to be a political immigrant. The main implicit accusation was that which Russian oligarchs were often slapped with, mixing up business and politics. Khodorkovsky funded Yabloko and the Union of Right Forces. His associates even funded the commies. He did push back against the Prosecutor General's charges of economic misconduct. That you don't pay taxes, that they found guns in your office. Could all of this be politically motivated? Personally, I have no doubt. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you don't. We also don't have any doubts. The arrest of Khodorkovsky and a large stake of his company meant that the old unspoken rules had to be reconsidered. The privatization would stand, though there had to be exceptions, as we all knew full well how certain private property was acquired. Large-scale deals and strategic investors were needed, but deliberations were also in order. Any change was meant to be accepted calmly. I would ask to refrain from any hysteria and speculation on the matter. The YUKOS case was almost even worse for the image of Russia and its president in the West than the war in Chechnya. Khodorkovsky was the second most frequently mentioned Russian in the international media after Putin. Most of the publications about YUKOS were expressing sympathy, while assuming that the Russian government had gone back to its old ways. Here's the cover from an issue of Time magazine from that period. This says, "Greetings, comrade." The main article explains the meaning of the word siloviki and goes on to use it without translation. And here's a copy of the German Spiegel, with headlines reading, "The KGB versus Capital," as well as "Putin and Billionaires."
While the hunters were loading their rifles,
The worst mining accident in recent years, and the most successful rescue operation ever conducted. 46 miners got trapped in the Zapadnaya mine in Rostov province. 44 were saved, 1 died, another one was declared missing. At night, 1,300 feet beneath the surface, water from an underground lake found its way into the mine. 33 miners were rescued within 24 hours, which was already a miracle. You want to go home? Of course I do, like right now. I'm gonna go for a swim first. To extract the rest, they spent 6 days boring a 200-foot-long tunnel from the neighboring Komsomolskaya Pravda mine. They recovered another 11 living people and 1 dead body. On behalf of the president, the miners visited the Kremlin, where they asked to be moved out of their dilapidated houses. To aid the workers in moving into new housing out of their dilapidated homes, where the living conditions are simply unacceptable. The operation of the year, an attempt to separate Siamese twins in Iran. This type of surgery had been around for half a century, but Laleh and Ladan Bijani were fused by their heads. They were 29 years old at that point, and though doctors were giving them a 50-50 chance of a successful outcome, they still decided to go through with the surgery. Laleh and Ladan Bijani graduated from the Tehran University Law School with honors, but had different plans going forward. A doctor from Singapore named Keith Goh reached out to help them, him already having separated Siamese twins. During surgery, it turned out that the 2 sisters' brain tissue had fused. Ladan died first, followed by Laleh 90 minutes later. Right before the operation, they were saying, "If God wills us to live separately, then we will survive." The main war of 2003, when the United States decimated Iraq. You could say it was a postponed war. In 1991, when Bush Sr. was president, Operation Desert Storm ended at liberating Kuwait. Saddam's regime wasn't toppled. This time, Bush Jr. finished what his dad had started with Operation Shock and Awe. With support from Britain, the US Army entered Iraq on March 20th, and by April 9th, Baghdad had fallen. They were offering a $25 million reward for helping to catch Saddam Hussein, and amazingly enough, they did find him. America's latest doctrine allowed preemptive strikes and overthrowing rogue regimes. This created a rift in Europe for the first time since World War II. The war was supported by England, Italy, and Spain, while France and Germany were strongly against it. Russia was apprehensive, but mostly indifferent. They found no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Even now, after the fighting has been over for 2 weeks, the questions still remain. Where is Saddam? Where are the alleged arsenals, if they even existed? The Blitzkrieg was followed by lengthy guerrilla warfare, with more Americans being killed in the conquered Iraq than during the process of conquering it. This no longer appeared to be a short and victorious war. More and more people in the States were opposing it, and then they pulled out Saddam quite literally from underneath the ground.
Lady and gentlemen, он попался.
We got him.
Bush's second presidential term appeared to be recovered.
Today, on behalf of the nation, I thank the members of our armed forces, and I congratulate them. I also have a message for all Americans.
Central Committee Member, Foreign Affairs Minister Raul Leroy and other officials.
In the summer of 2003, there was a series of car crashes involving Gazelles. These vans were the most popular choice for a minibus, and they were colliding with each other, with other cars, with a train, and even with a tank. 9 people were killed in a crash near Moscow on June 10th, where a Gazelle struck a KAMAZ truck parked on the side of the road. What speed? It had to be 60 miles an hour. About 60? It was a rough impact. I mean, look, the roof is folded in half. Operation Gazelle was launched in Moscow and its suburbs. 171 vans were taken off the road. Private companies were building minibuses based on other versions of the Gazelle, installing extra seats, and people were often standing inside crowded cabins. A lot of the drivers didn't have the right license. Gazelles were some of the cheapest vans you could buy, and they had almost no competition, just like the RAF during Soviet times. The car didn't pass inspection, there's no fire extinguisher, first aid kit is missing. In the fall of 2003, the Russian Prosecutor General's office was losing one international battle after another. The UK refused to extradite businessmen Boris Berezovsky and Yuli Dubov, as well as a Chechen separatist leader by the name of Akhmed Zakayev. Meanwhile, Greece denied extradition of Vladimir Gusinsky. The most powerful businessman of the Yeltsin era, Berezovsky, and his companion Dubov were granted asylum in the UK. Because back home they were risking persecution on account of their political convictions. Please address me properly, I'm Mr. Vladimir Putin. 1 year prior, Denmark refused to turn in Zakayev. In the time between the crimes they charged him with and him being declared wanted, he had a cordial relationship with official Moscow, which Western courts were now accusing of being biased. I am happy that it's over, at least for now, at this stage. In Greece, even the attorney's office deemed the accusations against Gusinsky to be vague. Already extradition of Gusinsky had been refused by Spain, but Russia and Greece were directly bound by an extradition treaty. Greece had turned in a bunch of criminals before, and this refusal appeared to be a display of European standards of justice. In 2003, California, the most populated state in America, sent its old governor into early retirement and elected Arnold Schwarzenegger to be the new one. Some expected it to happen, others were in disbelief. What place does a superstar bodybuilder and A-list action movie actor have in politics? However, the third Terminator movie that came out right before the election was not only the longest and most expensive campaign ad in history, but it was also quite effective. Up against 135 candidates, the Terminator earned 49% of all votes.
I'll drive.
Under the Democrat Governor Davis, California's budget deficit grew to $40 billion. The Republican candidate Schwarzenegger capitalized on every bit of Terminator 3's $170 million budget. Who's the top dog?
Дэвис терминировал наши мечты. Теперь мы должны терминировать Дэвиса.
Voters were obviously supporting the old American dream, him being a nobody from Austria with a heavy accent and an unpronounceable last name who eventually rose to the top. But they were especially voting for the new American dream, where a superhuman Terminator was fighting the evil of the world, just like their own superpower home country. Schwarzenegger was the perfect superhero poster boy for the international war on terror. I know what I need to do to make the Terminator character better, more interesting, funnier, more machine-like. And I want to be like the character that I created in real life. Politics were now inseparable from pop culture. Even Mickey Mouse could have won an election. Furthermore, with him having been born in the US, he very well could have run for president.
Starring Tom Hanks. Congratulations, how do you feel? I gotta pee. I believe he said he has to go pee.
In November of 2003, there was a regime change in Georgia. Some were calling this a revolt, others referred to it as the Velvet Revolution. The parliamentary election on November 2nd was obviously rigged, and though the majority clearly distrusted the government, they still announced victory for the two parties that supported the president. The leaders of the opposition claimed that their victory had been stolen from them. They staged a rally in the center of Tbilisi that went on for almost 3 weeks in a row. On November 22nd, the first session of the new parliament was disrupted by a mob. The opposition then took over Georgia's key government agencies, and finally, on the evening of November 23rd, forced President Shevardnadze to resign. The only thing exploding were fireworks, and not a single shot was fired during the entire political crisis. But the economic crisis had been going on for years, and Georgia was long being torn apart by separatism. A good third of the country was out of Tbilisi's control. Immediately after the regime change, we interviewed the former president, the current acting president, and the supposed future president of Georgia. It would have been insulting if someone were to give me a piece of paper and say, "Sign it." You have my word, that should be enough. You believe that the leaders of South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Adjaria will fly into Tbilisi? Absolutely positive. Do you have what it takes to be president? Oh yeah, I know that I believe in the people, and that together with the people, with my people, we can turn the tides. A spaceship crash shown on live TV. The American Shuttle Columbia fell to pieces upon re-entry. The 7 crew members were killed, including the first Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon. Columbia's debris was scattered over hundreds of miles. I thought it was trash. Turns out it's an insignia with all of the crew members' names. I can't hold back my tears. Columbia was already doomed right after takeoff. 81 seconds in, a piece of exterior foam broke off and hit the left wing, and the resulting crack, though allowing the ship to gain altitude, meant hot gases penetrating the heat protection upon descent and melting the wing frame. Here's the ship's final transmission.
Houston, we see your tire pressure messages, and we did not copy your last.
Instrumentation, Max. Flight Max.
Because of the disaster, everybody had to reconsider their space travel plans, with reliable ships only being possessed by Russia. Construction of the International Space Station was delayed, as were space flights for tourists. After celebrating its 300th birthday, St. Petersburg, effectively the country's second capital, finally got around to building a proper vertical of power. Putin's natural cycle of nomenclature. The deputy prime minister becomes his rep becomes governor, the governor makes deputy prime minister, the former deputy prime minister becomes his rep. Everyone keeps saying you'll become governor. One thing I know for certain, the anniversary is a mere 2 weeks away, and we have a lot of work to do. Deputy Prime Minister Valentina Matvienko was now the president's envoy, and she was overseeing anniversary preparations. Governor Vladimir Yakovlev was appointed as deputy prime minister. So when you were moving out of Smolny, did that bring a tear to your eye? Are you a sensitive person? It's hard to bring me to tears. If anything, I'd say it felt like a moment of truth. Later, Valentina Matvienko, despite resisting in the past, agreed to run for governor. Even with support from the central government, she didn't win after one round. Voter turnout was at a record low. Votes against all were at a record high. To honor and protect the rights and freedoms of people and citizens, the combination ended with former Deputy Prime Minister Klebanov being appointed as the presidential envoy. Here's a popular joke from that election cycle. Who wants to be a millionaire is on. The question: name the next governor of St. Petersburg. Answers: A. Valentina, B. Valentina, C. Valentina, D. Valentina. The player asks, can I call a friend? Sure, go ahead. Hello, Mr. Putin? Can you tell me the name of St. Petersburg's next governor? The 2003 Nobel Prize in Physics was shared between Anthony Leggett from America and 2 Russian scientists, Academy members Abrikosov and Ginzburg. They were awarded for their contribution to the theory of superconductors and superfluids. Alexei Abrikosov and Vitaly Ginzburg had already shared a Lenin Prize back in '66. In more recent years, Abrikosov had been living and working in the United States. Alexei Abrikosov worked at the Argonne Lab and resided in a typical American suburb. I received a letter from Russia's President Putin today. Did you get a letter from Bush? I did not. Even if he knew what was going on, they'd still have to explain to him that he needs to send a letter. Vitaly Ginzburg was still working at the Lebedev Institute of Physics and living at his academy dacha in Novodarino. This is page 1 of the... Nobel lecture I've begun to write. It's a historic document. He read said lecture at the Stockholm University.
We were in evacuation in Kazan. It was hunger, not starvation, but no food. And water freeze in our room. And I do not understand myself why I was so enthusiastic in low temperature physics.
2 years before Abrikosov and Ginzburg, it was Zhores Alferov, but before him you'd have to go back to 1978, when Academy member Kapitsa received the Nobel Prize for Physics. And it looks like we're in for another big break, with there being nobody to forward theoretical physics in our country. I consider myself more of an American, and most of the Nobel Prize-winning work was indeed done back during Soviet times. A regime change in Azerbaijan marks the start of the first new dynasty on post-Soviet territory. Heydar Aliyev, who first became the national leader back in 1969, was replaced by his own son Ilham. In August, his father appointed him as prime minister. Then both father and son were presidential candidates. In October, Heydar dropped out of the race in favor of his son. On October 15th, Ilham was elected president. On December 12th, Heydar Aliyev passed away.
Azerbaijan's Communist Party Central Committee, its bureau, and its chairman, our esteemed comrade Heydar Aliyev.
The Aliyev era now lived on thanks to Ilham, son of Heydar. During the 6 months leading up to the vote, Aliyev Sr. managed the country by proxy, from clinics in Turkey and the US. On multiple occasions, authorities denied rumors of his death, while posters on the streets featured both candidates posing together. 2 weeks before the election, Aliyev Sr. addressed the people and claimed that he believed in his son as much as in himself. 77% voted for the 42-year-old Ilham. The main question is always what personal traits were inherited by the heir. Aliyev Sr. was given a burial in Baku worthy of a nation's father. December 7, 2003 was the day of the fourth State Duma election in modern Russian history. And for the first time, it was won by the ruling party. The communists not winning was also a first, as was the fact that no liberal party earned any seats, and that Russia's parliamentary election was being harshly criticized worldwide. The OSCE described it as a regression of democracy. With the parliament under full control, Russia was now officially a presidential absolutist state. Together with the president. Vote for United Russia. These 4 words, together with the president, were a slogan, charter, and agenda. Voters were essentially choosing whether or not to have a government at all. United Russia was the entire new political establishment, appointed by the president and approved by the vast majority of the population. These results reflect the population's actual preferences. Those who didn't mind contemporary Russian capitalism either wanted a different crop of liberal parties or didn't want them at all. For those who were discontent, a new party was founded. This was very different from how things were done in the West, but then this wasn't the West. Our delegation has assessed active use of state apparatus and media favoritism. In the summer of 2003, a new 21st century pastime was born, called flash mob, when a crowd of people would come together out of nowhere. These were gatherings that were coordinated in advance via the internet, where participants would surprise bystanders with their strange, identical behavior. The point was just to have some fun and try something fresh. The first ever flash mob took place in June in New York, where 150 people went to a furniture store to ask for a love rug. Then 300 people hailed a dinosaur in a toy store. Howard Rheingold was credited with inventing the concept. His 200-page study titled Smart Mobs was the movement's Bible. Technology has mobilized society, and a flash mob can appear and disappear anywhere. All that's needed is primitive equipment. This makes it easy to even stage a revolution. We're participating in a flash mob. Why would you be doing that? Just to have fun. On August 15th, 20 people were clapping in the middle of the GUM store, next to the fountain. This is how flash mobs debuted in Russia. Here, young folks with TV remotes are trying to change the channel on an enormous digital billboard. It's just all commercials. Law enforcement was concerned about the crowd of 40 people. They even called in a riot police unit just in case. They detained you because of the remote? In a different flash mob, people in Moscow and St. Petersburg were greeting passengers that never existed, being cheeky while trying to keep a straight face, avoid talking to one another or explaining to anybody what's going on. In Odessa, some sad-looking folks dressed in black brought flowers to a plastic statue of Ronald McDonald. Suffice to say, the locals didn't appreciate the joke. They brought flowers, as if they were honoring someone who died. Who died again? The manager of these McDonald's. This was the first time I ever went to McDonald's. And here I am looking at people with flowers mourning someone. They were grieving, and that made me feel sad. And that concludes this 2003 edition of The Other Day, on the events, people, and phenomena of the year. New Year is actually also a flash mob in its own right, with people spontaneously celebrating all at the same time and in the same manner, clinking glasses and having drinks. We'll be releasing weekly newscasts every Sunday. See you there. Happy New Year, best wishes.